if keeping my job means that I have to make any compromises in the liberation struggle in this country, then I'll gladly leave my job. This is my position. Now, we have to talk about the political content. We have to talk about the necessity to raise the level of consciousness of the people who are involved in that movement. And if you analyze the war in Vietnam, first of all, it ought to become obvious that if the United States government pulled its troops out of Vietnam, that repression would have to crop up somewhere else. And in fact, we're seeing a couple of weeks, which is the chaining and gagging of Chairman Bobby Seale and his sentence to 4 years for contempt of court. I think that demonstrates that if the link-up is not made between what's happening in Vietnam and what's happening here, we may very well face a period of full-blown fascism very soon. Now, I think there's something perhaps more profound that we ought to point to. This whole economy in this country is a war economy. There's disruption on the campus. Then he says disruption in industrial areas. I think it points to the fact that they are going to begin to use that whole military apparatus in order to put down the resistance in the black and brown community, on the campuses, in the working class communities. American troops, but parallels that we can draw. Some very profound parallels, I think. And we, the U.S. government, get out of Vietnam rather than satisfy the needs of our people in this country, we ought to be
I don't have to feel guilty about taking credit for my father's defense of Wayne Green, but was another member of the family. Well, I'd like to talk a little bit with you about the point that Masai made about whose responsibility it is, in fact, to make sure that this demonstration is a demonstration that's relevant to black people. Now, I can remember a long time ago when the civil rights movement was a very popular thing around this sitting in, and people were picketing and people were protesting and everything. And the call came up then for a compensatory solution to the problems, compensatory hiring, compensatory housing, compensatory other programs. A lot of people, myself included, made the point that this nation has a 200-year debt to black people, and it's a debt that we're not going to make up by, on paper, treating them equal, but only when we take extra steps and begin to find some sort of compensatory way to make up for the hell that we've visited black people with for 200 years in this nation. Well, of course, we have a lot of differences among the movement about this. A lot of the liberals were saying, well, that's just reverse discrimination. No, it has to be equal and even all the way around. The debate continued for some time, then it died down as people turned off into other issues. Well, it seems to me, finally, that in relationship to Vietnam, we have finally achieved that compensatory progress. I don't know if it's, in fact, I know it's not the same one we were seeking, but it's the compensatory thing nonetheless. There's 40,000 Americans dead now in Vietnam. 10,000 of those are black people. Now, that's a compensatory measure. That's not quite as compensatory as the number of black people on death row, but I think it shows a little bit about what this society thinks about the value of a black person's life. Likewise, it's not just on the death, has made a serious mistake in this demonstration and in organizing and building for it. And what that mistake is that you have relied on white people to make this demonstration relevant to your community. And that's not going to work. Now, it may be, I agree, people in the peace movement are a little more advanced and a little more progressive than the population at large. Maybe only 4/5 of them are racist instead of 9/10 of them. But don't forget that this is a demonstration that right now is in the hands of white people, that is being directed and guided by white people, and that is where the mistake has come about. Now, you know that there's been a big dispute, and I'm sure that Masai can tell you all about it. There's been quite a dispute in the organization of this demonstration. Well, that dispute, contrary to a lot of what you've heard, is not a sectarian dispute. It's not an organizational dispute. It's a political dispute. And it's a dispute over political questions. And those questions are first and foremost a dispute over the relevancy of the United Front policy, because that is what the fight in the organization of this demonstration has been about. And that takes a couple of forms. One is the single issue versus the multi-issue approach to this demonstration. Now, I don't know how many of you are even aware that one of the demands of this demonstration, coming out of the Cleveland Conference and carried on at least all of our material, is stop the repression, free all political prisoners. That is the demand of the march, to free all political prisoners. But how much have you heard about it? How much have you heard that point discussed? How much have you heard people take the platform and demand that political prisoners be freed, and to spell out exactly what that is? There's another demonstration. It is not that, but I must say, first of all and foremost, it's your responsibility to make sure that our United Front is advanced, and when you're marching orders and join this parade, and you make this lesson tough, you make everyone win.
In one of his nests long enough and hiding to slip $200,000 by and then he said about his children.
Then you can put it down.
The fact that there are people at this rally supporting the Communist Party's candidate for the President of the United States, I think is very important, regardless of the size. 10 years ago, I don't think you would have seen anyone who would have come out in support of the Communist Party precisely because of the fact that the anti-communism and the repression was so thorough. I think that the campaign today is a sign of the increasingly radical, increasingly revolutionary tendencies which you can see among black people, Chicanos, white workers, among all of those who aren't a part of the ruling class in this country today. People advised me that I should refuse to answer the question, and they were right, because I did have a constitutional right to refuse to submit myself to that kind of political inquiry. But I think that the time has come when we have to be very open in the fight that we're waging, because we see all over the country that black people, brown people, and white people also were being subjected to all kinds of political repression. They're spending, Bobby Seale, for instance, now is facing a murder charge and also facing the conspiracy charge around the Chicago Convention. Eldridge Cleaver is in exile. We have to talk about a complete and total change in the structures of this society, because that's the only way that a concept like academic freedom is going to be made relevant. We have to go to the streets. The Berkeley campus has perhaps the most unique tradition of political activity. You have continually assumed the political responsibility of responding to acts of repression and have been capable of involving the masses of the students on this campus in demonstrative political actions. If only for this reason, I feel very proud to be able to speak to you today.
What Angela Davis had to say here at UC Berkeley was no different from what many other radicals have said. Her only problem seems to be that she's given herself a label. She calls herself a member of the Communist Party. Belva Davis for Eyewitness News, UC Berkeley.
They didn't have to identify themselves as pigs, because anyone on the street caught from this moment forward molesting anyone you did who doesn't have on a sentence to 9 months imprisonment and 3 years probation. The racist hunky dog judge sit up there
I believe that the fight is just beginning to start. The fight against all those who want to make your university a training school for the perpetuation of a society, the security of which and the prosperity of which is based on the oppression and enslavement of other peoples within the national frontiers and without. The fight against these powers must go on because it is a fight for you.
Come to the aid of another student or a fellow citizen.
We talk about freedom of speech. We are talking about something substantive, and we're not simply talking about a formal notion of freedom of speech. And those who would call for the right to speak freely in order to openly prevent others from having rights and liberties that are guaranteed them by the Constitution. I mean, I think that is a contradiction in terms. I mean, if you're going to allow somebody to be free to advocate genocide, if you're going to allow somebody to be free to organize genocide, to organize murder and racism, then that doesn't make any sense at all. I think it's very clear. Being a serious fighter against racism, any form of injustice, poverty, imperialism, war, you have to talk about organizing masses of people. This is why we call this press conference. We call this press conference to inform you, and hopefully so that you would inform the people that we are building a movement to ensure that Yvonne Golden is not convicted, to ensure that she does not become a scapegoat for those who are the real criminals in the city. And that is the way you build mass movements. That is the way you build political struggle. You do not do those things which will alienate the people. You do not do those things which will push people further away from you, but you do those things which will draw people into your movement, draw people into your struggle, draw all people who are seriously interested in fighting injustices.
Do you think
The defense organization in the Bay Area is urgent. It is particularly important because we have to talk about defending Ruchell McGee, who is now facing a second trial in San Jose. We must talk about how to build a mass movement to free the San Quentin Six and Earl Gibson and Larry Justice. We must talk about how to build a movement here in the Bay Area to support and defend our sisters and brothers who were indicted as a result of the struggle at Wounded Knee. And there is Brother Teodale Campos. Other drafters of this. So I would urge
thousands of people who are victims of police chiefs who want to keep the first day I was in jail. You know why? Because they didn't know who I was. That was the thing that was really funny, and it made me sick, because when I was let out of that maximum security cell where I had been chained, the captain, the Los Angeles Sheriff's Department captain, came in and said, Mr. Russo, we didn't know who you were. Well, I said, you know, who am I? Well, the fact of the matter was that our case had publicity, and the fact that I got beat up in jail was something that drew attention to them, and that's what they were worried about. They didn't care who I was. They were really afraid of who you gentlemen are, who the mass media are, and they were afraid of mass media attention being drawn to that.
Counsel to represent her in the California case.
What about the idea for the defense? Do you have any idea now what the defense might be?
No, it's unclear at this moment. She, as you know, she just arrived to California from New York. She hasn't had a moment to think about her California case yet.
Have you talked to her about this case and what she says her involvement is in it?
No, I haven't.
We discussed a plea.
No, I haven't. That will be done on January 5th.
What about change of venue?
That has not been discussed yet either.
Have you talked to her at all?
Around here one moment.
Did you talk to her last night in jail?
Yes, I spoke with her this morning.
What is her general feeling?
She is getting used to her new surroundings here in California, and she feels very upset as a result of her treatment by New York authorities. And in the process of extraditing her, she was manhandled by New York and California authorities, and it was quite a shaking experience for her.
Can you be more specific about that?
She was roughly treated. She was fraudulently transferred from the New York prison to the California authorities. I don't think it's appropriate here to go into details.
As far as Angela Davis is concerned, the matter of her formal appeal, as well as who will be representing her from this point forward, will perhaps come to light within the next 2 weeks. Among those being mentioned as possible permanent attorneys, John Thorne of San Jose and Terrence Hallinan of San Francisco. Bail will almost certainly be requested by the defense on the basis that Miss Davis is accused of plotting and conspiring a crime, not necessarily carrying it out. The prosecution will say these are non-bailable offenses. There is the matter of venue. Unofficially, there is no judge here that would be willing to try the case. It is simply too close to home. The kidnap attempt and shootout that took the life of a colleague, as well as 2 inmates and an accomplice. This would leave 2 alternatives: bring in an outside judge or move the trial. At any rate, the pretrial proceedings will be held here, apparently to include an appearance by Miss Davis's co-defendant, Rochelle McGee, who would have to be transported here from San Quentin Prison. All of this presents an added security problem for sheriff's officials who have already built up the tightest and most efficient security system possible in a public building. Mike Lee, Eyewitness News, San Rafael.
Free all prisoners!
Yeah! Free all people in or out of the jails!
I have no idea what the line of defense is. The procedure right now is to try and get Ms. Davis' California lawyer who will represent her at the next hearing, which, as you know, has been set for January 5th.
Will McGee and Angela Davis appear simultaneously or separate?
At that date, they will appear.
But where?
Here in Marin County.
McGee will come from San Quentin to this.
As far as I know.
Poorly kept secrets in University of California history became officially public in Los Angeles today. The Board of Regents formalized what they apparently decided to do some time ago, that is, fire Angela Davis. Technically, however, the board is just not renewing her one-year contract as acting assistant professor of philosophy at UCLA. That contract expires this month. The final vote was 15-6, with the regents meeting behind closed doors as a committee of the whole. However, indications are the board had agreed informally to dump her at earlier meetings in San Francisco. Having been overruled once by the courts, the board declared its majority opinion was based not on Miss Davis's Communist Party membership, but her professional conduct. Angela Davis learned of the predicted move while speaking before a Los Angeles rally in support of 3 Soledad prisoners accused of killing a guard. Specifically, the regents conceded she did not appear to be using her classroom to indoctrinate students, nor did her outside activities interfere with her teaching duties. The decision was based on what the board described as, quote, extravagant and inflammatory rhetoric in her public speeches, including the reference to police as pigs. The board also said she made unsatisfactory progress toward her doctorate. Ms. Davis declined comment. She was later quoted as saying she would take legal action but did not specify. Her non-reappointment is seen as a victory for Governor Reagan.
Okay, let's line up there.
It was based wholly on the questions that were brought up by the ad hoc faculty committee with regard to her remarks and her conduct in speaking around at various campuses. And it was believed that this was displayed in unprofessional conduct, and it was on this basis that the regents voted she not be rehired.
Does this report mean that she is fired because she didn't advocate academic?
She was not fired. She was hired for 1 year. That year is up June 30th. Subsequently, the department came in with the issue as to whether she should be rehired for another year. And the regents have voted that she should not be rehired. And I think you'll find in that report also that there is a mention that there are 52 unfilled positions now on the campus due to lack of budget for filling those, and that to find some way to put her over above those others, that she just did not warrant that kind of priority.
Governor, will she be allowed to lecture on campus?
Well, now, the matter of a guest lecture or being invited by a student group to come speak, this, of course, is something that is completely different than the present position of teaching. I think it's all in that statement that we have made it plain that the regents have said she is not to be a teaching officer of the university.
Do you think Angela Davis will teach or lecture on campus this coming fall?
Well, the only thing I have to go on is the vote taken actually by mail ballot of the Academic Senate, and they asked the Senate to provide her the facilities for actually teaching. I have asked the committee to find out how this may be done in a legal manner, and I hope to have a report back.
So she could well be teaching despite the regent's ruling.
I have asked the committee to look into the mechanics of how this might be able to be done.
I believe that the Angela Davis case decision today by the Board of Regents is quite misleading for the people of California. The governor has gotten the board to say she cannot teach, but she still can lecture. In effect, she's still going to be on the campuses. I think the people who think that she's being fired because she's a communist, actually she's being fired because of off-campus, non-working hour speeches. She's had her federal constitutional rights violated. She's a 26-year-old bookish black girl, no threat to any of our traditional values. I think the governor is trying to turn the state into a stage of hysteria over very, very little. We should get back to the denial of funds for the university's budget and other more fundamental matters.